Thomas John Dude Esterbrook was born on June 20th, 1857 in Staten Island, New York. Esterbrook made his professional debut in 1880 at the age of 23 for the Buffalo Bisons of the National Association. He would play alongside future Hall of Famers Pud Galvin and Old Hoss Radbourn, batting .241 while recording 12 doubles in 64 games, 47 at first base. In 1881, Esterbrook would play for the New York Metropolitans of the Eastern Championship Association. Though there are no official statistics for this semi-professional league, there are many accounts of Esterbrook's solid play throughout the season, including this account from the Philadelphia Inquirer on August 16, 1881. Esterbrook was 5 times at the bat and reached first base 5 times, 4 times on clean hits and once on error, in New York's 10-2 victory over the Philadelphia Athletics in the 9th game of the Eastern Baseball Championship. In 1882, Esterbrook would play for the semi-professional New York Metropolitans of the League Alliance for a brief period before being acquired by the Cleveland Blues, playing in 45 games while batting .246 and playing most of the season in the outfield. 1883 saw Esterbrook rejoin his New York Metropolitans, this time as a member of the American Association. Esterbrook would play alongside future Hall of Fame pitcher Tim Keefe and legendary slugger Dave Orr, batting .253 while placing 3rd in the league in fielding percentage with .871 in his first season playing third base. 1884 was a breakout year for Esterbrook, again playing for the Metropolitans of the American Association. Esterbrook would lead the league in games played with 112 while batting a career-high .314 with 29 doubles, 11 triples, 150 hits, and an OPS plus of 149. He would also place 3rd in fielding percentage with .886, recording yet another solid season at the hot corner. Esterbrook's play would help the Metropolitans to a 75, 32, and 5 record, good enough for the American Association pennant and a date with the Providence Grays in the World Series. The Providence Grays would go on to win this series 3-0 with Old Hoss Radbourn pitching 3 consecutive complete games en route to a sweep of New York. This would be the same season that Radbourn won a record 59 games. 1885 would see Esterbrook join the New York Giants of the National League, batting .256 with 14 doubles, while continuing his solid defensive play at third base with an .885 fielding percentage in 88 games, 84 at third base, which was good enough for 4th in the league. The Giants would finish in second place with an 85-27 record to the powerhouse Chicago White Stockings, who would win the pennant by just 2 games. In 1886, Esterbrook would have his finest defensive season on the diamond by placing 2nd in fielding percentage at third base with .895. While batting .264 with 20 doubles and 125 hits in 123 games. The Giants would fall to 3rd place behind the Detroit Wolverines, and the Chicago White Stockings would again win the National League pennant with a 90-34 record. In 1887, Esterbrook would rejoin the New York Metropolitans and miss playing time due to an illness and an arm injury, playing in only 26 games, bouncing between first base, second base, shortstop, and the outfield, and would bat only .168. In a May 27, 1887, St. Louis Post-Dispatch article, New York manager Bob Ferguson stated that Esterbrook embarrasses him, and admits that while he is a fine player and perhaps the best batter in the club, there is no place in the team for him as long as Frank Hankinson covers third base and bats as he has, and Dave Orr continues to play first base and bats as he is accustomed to doing. 1888 would see Esterbrook bounce between the Indianapolis Hoosiers of the National League and the Louisville Colonels of the American Association, playing in 87 total games with a .221 average, primarily playing first base. In a Sunday, April 22, 1888 edition of the Chicago Tribune, a report details an incident between Esterbrook and the Chicago White Stockings. In the 8th, Esterbrook made a single and was forced out at second by Bassett's hitting to Williamson. There was a chance for a double play, but when Esterbrook saw that he was out, he ran harder than before and threw his whole weight against second baseman Pfeffer, knocking him 6 feet off the base. Pfeffer held the ball and turned around and made a motion as if to throw it at Esterbrook's head. Then he rushed up to him in a menacing manner, but did not strike him. In a few seconds, the entire nine and the umpire were near second base. Valentine fined Esterbrook $5, and then Martin Sullivan, who had run in from left field, expressed his opinion of the dude and told what he would do with him if he got a chance. "If you ever strike me, I'll kill you," replied Esterbrook, shaking his index finger at Sullivan. The Weekly Republican Travelers of Arkansas City, Kansas, reported the following on May 25, 1888. Good-natured Ed Williamson had hurled himself against Pfeffer. Ed's disposition became somewhat combative. He stood within a few feet of Pfeffer and saw how deliberate and brutal Esterbrook's act was, and he said, "Couldn't help getting hot." Pfeffer says, "I'm all right. Esterbrook didn't hurt me. And hereafter, Silver Flint will do my fighting. The other clubs can now trot out their fighters. I'm ready." This incident with Esterbrook and Pfeffer was reported in many papers across the nation, and another was reported on the following day. On Monday, April 23rd, the Kansas City Times reported, "Why the devil did you block me?" exclaimed Sullivan angrily, turning around and rubbing his left shoulder, which had come in contact with Tom Esterbrook's left shoulder. The words had barely escaped the lips of the Chicago left fielder when, quick as a wink, Esterbrook's fist shot out, and Sullivan would now be wearing his left eye in mourning, had he not warded off the blow with his arm. The Indianapolis first baseman took a step forward and made another pass, but Sullivan, instead of returning the blow for blow and knocking his assailant to the ground, as he would have been perfectly justified in doing, simply caught Esterbrook's arms and held them. The first baseman wriggled, but Sullivan held him in a vice. "You damn fool, what do you mean by striking at me?" hissed Sullivan through his teeth, so that it was heard in the grandstand. He was as cool as a man could be under the circumstances. "Let go of me, goddamn you," cried Esterbrook, and then he jerked away. Captain Denny had run over from shortstop's position by this time, and Anson was approaching from in front of the players' bench, where he had stood up to urge Sullivan to run as his fly went sailing out to left field. Boyles also came running up to first base from the box. The two men were quarreling and gesticulating when Denny stepped in between them. Sullivan turned away, saying as he did so to Denny, "You had better find that," calling Esterbrook a bad name. Again, the words were hardly spoken when Esterbrook sprang forward and struck Sullivan a strong blow on the left jaw, reaching over Denny's shoulder to do it. It was a cowardly blow, because Sullivan's face was partially turned away. Anson, with a bat in his hand, was within 6 feet of the spot at the time of the second assault. The old man's face was as red as fire, and he cried, "What's the matter with you, Sullivan? Are you going to let him wipe up the ground with you?" At the same time, he turned Sullivan around and shoved him towards Esterbrook. Thus urged, the cool-headed fielder started for his antagonist, but the brave and courageous Esterbrook at once took several steps to the rear, and before the men could meet, Williamson had caught Sullivan, and the Indianapolis players had crowded in to protect the threatened first baseman. Esterbrook would be fined $25 for the incident, but this was the beginning of the end of his playing career, as he would never again be in the good favor of his fellow baseballists. Following the 1888 season and the controversy sparked by Esterbrook's actions for Indianapolis, he was frozen out of the club by a combination of players. The day he left town, he offered to lick any two men in the club, and the report stated that he was very handy with his fists and is also quite a ball player. For the next 3 seasons, between 1889 and 1891, Esterbrook would play for the Louisville Colonels, New York Giants, and the Brooklyn Grooms, playing in a total of 59 games with a .297 average, 17 doubles, and an OPS plus of 113 while primarily playing first base. During this time, there are a few stories of Esterbrook outside of the random fine of $25 for calling an umpire a liar, or being mentioned as one of the greatest first basemen of his era, along with the likes of future Hall of Famers Cap Anson and Dan Bruthers, among others. Esterbrook would sign with the New Orleans Pirates of the Southern League in mid-June of 1894 after having left baseball for 3 years. Esterbrook was always noted as a fine dresser and arrived to some fanfare in New Orleans with 4 trunks of fashionable clothes. Esterbrook would play only 2 games before his release from the New Orleans club. Shortly after Esterbrook's stint with the Pirates, odd stories began to surface about the former ball player. On August 22, 1894, the Pittsburgh Press reports on how a one-time great player is now in hard lines, and G.E. Livingston of Boston would state, "Well, when our Boston team, which is now playing continued championship baseball, was in Washington City the last time, Duffy the Great, Hugh, as he is styled, suddenly heard a cry of, "How are you, Duffy?" The questioner seemed to be in distress. His clothes were worn and dusty, and his shoes were worn with holes. Duffy, the always genial and kindly player of the champion Bostons, glanced at the speaker and inquired, "Who are you?" A hoarse reply was, "Tom Esterbrook, once known as the Dude of the National League." It was a true story, for he soon proved that he had actually walked from New Orleans to Washington City. Duffy gave his old-time compatriot player $30, and that evening when the Boston players took their train, they noticed a stylishly dressed man loitering in the waiting room and puffing a fragrant cigar. It was Dude Esterbrook, and Duffy, while startled at the metamorphosis, was pleased. While puffing contentedly at a perfecto, Esterbrook said to the generous Duffy, "Thanks, old man. Boston seems to be getting there, but I'm going to try as a card for the New York. They tell me I will be good. Good day." After Esterbrook's brief stint with New Orleans, his next sighting was on July 28, 1894, when the Baltimore Sun reported that the Dude had arrived in Baltimore and received a king's welcome from the visiting bean-eaters of Boston. This would mean that Esterbrook walked the entire distance from New Orleans to Baltimore, the distance of 1,139 miles in 28 days. Esterbrook would officially retire from baseball in late August 1894. The Wilkes-Barre Sunday News would provide this information with a certain bias when they reported, "Tommy Esterbrook announces his retirement from the diamond." Next. Esterbrook's odd behavior over the next few years would occasionally make the papers, such as a January 31, 1897 article, in which the Philadelphia Inquirer reported, 4 or 5 years ago, when Tommy Esterbrook, the once exquisite dude of baseball, was walking around New York with a green parrot on his shoulder, the gang were saying something about being nutty, screwy, and full of tacks. Well, the dude's good looks won him a fortune. He married a rich widow and is now in the dry goods business at New Brighton, New York. For years following his retirement, Esterbrook would exclaim that he did not know why he had not been signed by another team, stating in a league meeting that, "They made a big mistake when they let me drop out of the game, but I'll be back in yet. You see if I'm not. Why, I can play all around some of these young fellows who are called stars. Old Esther ain't a back number yet." It was also reported that Esterbrook's hat, a typical Mexican sombrero, was the hit of the meeting. In perhaps the strangest account of Esterbrook's eccentricities, it was reported by the Times-Union of Brooklyn, New York on March 16, 1898 that Esterbrook had become a victim of religious mania. The report went on to state that he has got to that stage of religious mania where he sees things. When the reporter asked about what the cause of this sudden religious turn of mind, Esterbrook replied, "The world, the flesh, and the devil. When I say the world, I mean people. I, the people. They constitute the world, and it's the people, not the world, that causes us to sin and heaps our trials and tribulations upon us. I've left all my past life behind, and have begun a new life. Like a child, I'm learning every day." Mr. Esterbrook, continuing, said he had been to the place that all men dreaded, but would not give a description of his experiences until he had grown older, claiming he was now only 4 years old and not fully developed, but that shortly the world would hear from him, that he had now conquered the world. The King of Kings was about to come on earth again, and that our old friend was here to prepare the way. Mr. Esterbrook now arrays himself in a white baseball costume, covered with large blue polka dots. With pleasure, he presents his photograph, of which he states, represents him before he became the son of a king. Then he broke forth in song from the Pirates of Penzance, the words being altered, of course, to fit the case. "For I am the son of the king, king, king. I am the son of the king. It is a glorious thing to be the son of a king." Thus, Brooklyn's idol is trying to establish a new religion, not that of an evangelist, nor of St. John, but that of the son of a king. On May 1, 1901, the New York Times reported that Esterbrook first thought himself a great inventor and talked of wonderful flying machines that he had invented. Then he became religious and finally came to believe that a man need never die. His idea was that if a man, no matter how old, behaved like a boy, played in the street, walked 8 to 10 miles a day, and took plenty of exercise, he could live to be 150. On April 30, 1901, the Pittsburgh Press reported that Esterbrook had been suffering from nervous prostration for some time past at his home in Stapleton, Staten Island, which developed into suicidal mania. he was being taken to the state hospital for treatment. The Middletown State Hospital was no ordinary institution for the treatment of mental disorders. It was a homeopathic psychiatric hospital with a range of new physical fitness treatment techniques, most notably of which was baseball. In 1888, they founded a team composed of patients, staff, and some of the best amateur baseball players in the region, and in 1891 narrowly lost a game with the New York Giants. Many players were recruited directly from the asylums to professional baseball. Unfortunately, Esterbrook would never arrive. On April 20th, 1901, on an Erie Mountain Express train with his brother en route to the Middletown State Hospital, Esterbrook was fatally injured, fracturing his skull after throwing himself through a window while the train was moving at 50 miles per hour. Esterbrook was 43 at the time of his death and was interred in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. Thomas John Esterbrook was one of the brightest stars of 19th century baseball. He was at times celebrated and at others vilified for his public life, as his eccentricities were unabashedly at the core of his persona. A true original who didn't only march to the beat of his own drum, but formed the band himself and was the lead conductor. Thomas Esterbrook achieved what most can only hope for, as he was beholden to no one, and for better or worse, the notorious dude of baseball lived life on his own terms and did so until the very end.